we all as people have different strengths, different weaknesses, different things that we can bring to the table. And the truer you can be to yourself, the more natural it's going to be and feel, which is going to allow you to be more successful.
And ladies and gentlemen, we are here live with the one and only Jordan Zalter. Jordan, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How you doing, Ollie?
I'm good. It's good to have you here, man. I see a lot of sports memorabilia in the background behind you. What do you got there?
Well, I've got a lot of Raptors and baseball stuff. I'm hanging out in the basement because we've actually got work going on in our house right now that I wasn't anticipating. So I'm trying to hide as best as I can from the noise.
That's
for
okay.
Anybody who's listening today.
Not a whole lot of background noise going on, so you're good there. What are those baseballs for?
That was a lot of trips with my grandfather. We used to go to a lot of games together, both spring training and regular season games. And every ball there, other than two, were balls that were caught live by me. Awesome. And then just spent years trying to get signatures from any player that I idolized as a kid. So lots of different stuff going on there.
So I may be wrong. I think I was speaking to your brother, and I may be mistaken about this, but he mentioned, I think you were at that Kawhi game where he hit the final the shot against the Sixers. Were you at that game at that point?
I was.
What was it like in the stadium?
It was pretty crazy. I mean, I will say that it was honestly probably the second most exciting sports moment in my life at the time that it happened. Believe it or not, a few years before that, I was chatting with a buddy of mine about it actually at the gala dinner this past weekend, that the most memorable Raptors shot for me that I was at the game was actually when Kyle Lowry hit that half court shot to send a game into overtime that we ultimately ended up losing. But that half court shot going in and the craziness there when it seemed like we had already lost that game was honestly that the moment wasn't quite as big, but at the time that was a pretty awesome feeling.
That's incredible for me that you would put above the Kawhi thing. I know in that game was actually an interesting.
Look, I'm the guy who was a Kyle Lowry fan before he ever came to the Raptors. I have a Kyle Lowry number 3 jersey. Most people forget that he wore a number before 7 for the Raptors. So for me, I think it was a big part was who took the shot. But it was that the combination of that and just honestly the excitement of that shot. Like we all thought we were going to win after he hit that. It's like there's no way we're going to lose now. We were down by 15 and made this crazy comeback and he hit a half court shot. And then we got our butts kicked in overtime. So it happens.
It was also playing a bad game. Like he had 2 points at that point, right?
Yeah. That's Lowry though, right? Like he shows up in a moment, even if he has a bad game, and then he went back to stinking in overtime. So it was just a lucky shot that at the time felt like destiny that ultimately didn't happen.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself. Then, outside of obviously you're a sports aficionado, more specifically Toronto sports aficionado, but professionally, personally, what's your story?
My story is I am a proud husband and father of 2 beautiful children, 7 and 5. I very family oriented in pretty much everything that I do, which has culminated in me working with my mom now for 13 years, selling houses together. She's been doing it for double that. We're at our, I don't know, that's something special about 13 and 26 because this will only ever happen to us once.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she's been doing it 26 years. I jumped into the business, got my real estate license while still doing a double honors at McMaster. Didn't even tell my parents I was doing it. I just showed up one day and said I got my real estate license. That scared the crap out of them because I thought I was dropping out of university, which obviously was not the plan. So it was more or less a summer and slight like weekends job for the first year and a half. And then once I was done with university, it's been full time ever since and love what I'm doing.
So you were one of the only other guys that I know other than myself that's actually gone into business with their mom. Like what's the experience been like for you and why was that decision that you decided to make?
Well, it's funny because I find in business, a lot of people struggle with finding that person or those people that they can trust 110%. And that's a very important segment of the business. A lot of real estate, which we'll talk more about later, is about relationship building, and that's incredibly important. But knowing that you have that one person that you can trust, respect, and understand without putting any effort into it. For us, like, I can speak for my mom as well, because she's said it to hundreds of clients with me over the years, that it's a level of trust and understanding that ultimately even spouses, I think, struggle with, right? Like, there's a lot of husband and wife teams that have done very well over the years. There's also many that have struggled or fizzled out because they didn't necessarily, maybe they brought too much of the same thing to the table, or there was still that little lack, even a small lack of trust can sometimes in a business partnership turn into something very big. Yeah. We don't have that issue, and that's been great. So, right. I mean, people will joke about it and say, oh my God, how can you possibly work with your mom every day? And I often will say, well, I have a very patient wife who's okay with that, because that really is a big component of it, because my mom is a big part of my life for two different reasons. A, because she's my mother, and B, because she's my business partner, right? So being able to manage that from a people standpoint is very helpful. But the reality is that from a business standpoint, and that trust that we have in each other is super important. I also think we're lucky enough that I've got enough in my dad in me that we bring very different skills to the table. So while there are certainly things that we're able to do similarly to one another, we both, like, she's more of a people person than I am. It's not that I'm not a people person, but she is the center of every room she ever, you know that. Like, if we're at an event together, she's working the room in a way that most people could only dream of being able to do. I'd rather talk to 5 people a night, not 50 people, right? So it's a different, we go about things differently, but we come to the same place, and ultimately we know what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, and it helps.
I think you kind of touched on something there about the trust, right? Like, it's in a relationship, let's say, between a husband and wife. If the trust isn't there, like, forget about working on anything. If you don't trust each other, like, that's it. Like, you got to base, I don't know. I don't want to say that.
And
like,
I would look, I mean, I think whether it's business or a relationship or anything, there's a lot of effort that you have to put into making a relationship work.
Absolutely.
With perhaps one exception. And that one exception is a parent, right? Like a parent and child, it's so unconditional that that my mom can do things that makes me want to pull my hair out. Doesn't happen that often, but I know that I make her want to pull her hair out sometimes. And it doesn't ever turn to a place of animosity. It very quickly just is like, oh, well, I love him and he's doing this and this is why, and that's okay. Right. So it's like that default to fall back onto is a really comfortable place to be, to the point where I've tried other business ventures in my life. I don't have to go too far into those, but when they're with anyone other than my mom, it's hard. Right? Because it as much as you think you trust somebody and as much as you think you know them, you don't know them as well as you know your mother.
Right.
So it's just a different animal.
I've actually not had that experience per se, meaning specifically when you were mentioning about like this, you have to work on any relationship with the exception of like a parent. I actually found that there were elements of it that were, when we were starting, almost more difficult than I anticipated they would be. Obviously, I've never really worked with anybody except for my mom, but I anticipate that it was more difficult in some ways working with my mom because it was almost like unnatural. Like, we have a relationship and then we needed to have almost 2 separate relationships going on at any given time. The thing that made it always possible, like I was mentioning about the relationship, as long as there's trust, it doesn't matter what's happening, you always have a shot of figuring it out, and there's always an answer. Without
that's a big part of it for sure, right? But I think for us, what was unique is that she had 13 years of a business that she built.
Right.
And it was a very successful business, but it really, to any educated eye, had plateaued at a certain point. And she knew that I had the expertise to take it to the next level. And I think knowing that and trusting that right away is what allowed us to grow as quickly as we did. And yeah, I was a rookie, so I was compensated fairly, but I didn't make a ton it certainly benefited her more in the short term. And then as we moved on and built our business more and more and more, there was more of a piece of the pie that I was able to have for myself and my family. But really, I think it's so nice to see that we really, there's never an argument about money. There's never an argument about commission. There's enough to go around. We respect what each of us do so much that there's no need to have those arguments. And it's become very seamless for us. And I know that that's not often the case for others. And I will certainly say that I mean, she's gone on enough vacations pre-COVID in my work life to say that for anybody starting out, we'll get to that later, but real estate partnerships work far better than real estate agents working on their own. It's a very demanding job that requires a lot of, call it, after hour care for clients, and the ability to have that split up so that you can have a personal life and you can have a social life where you can actually shut off for a few hours without letting your clients down is very valuable, right? And I think a lot of agents either just can't ever shut it off. And my mom was like that for a very long time. I had to literally, I remember years ago, told her she was going away on a trip with my dad for 3 weeks. And I forget where she was, but it was where cell service was not going to be good. And I made her leave me with her cell phone. And that was really scary for her. But I said, you don't need this. I have your back. I've got this. It's okay. Go on your trip. And yes, we had email communication, but that was probably the only time in her adult life that she didn't have a cell phone.
Yeah. Which is probably one of the reasons also that you guys are successful, is that you're actually reachable.
Correct.
Right.
I mean, look, that's a big part of it. But like I said, if you're starting out and you're trying to make a business plan, if you've got 2 people and one of them is reachable, you can stagger. You can even tell your clients, I'm available on this night, and this night, and Joe is available on this night, and this night. Between the 2 of us, we've got you covered.
Right.
Why can doctors do that? That's, I would say, probably more important to have 24-hour care. So why can doctors have that? A profession that I also am very intimately familiar with, but a real estate agent can't do that. It's blasphemy. No, you set those ground rules and it works. It works for us.
Right. So this is actually kind of a good transition into the next part is like forgetting about the market. Let's even say a year ago, whatever it is, like you guys have had like 1,000 or over 1,000 clients in your career. I don't know, collectively, respectively, whatever it may be. But you mentioned to me that despite the market being what it is, that a vast majority of the industry are struggling right now more so than ever, yet you guys are finding that you're more busy now than you were before the market was like this. So my question to you is, how can we make sense of that? How does that even fit?
Well, the context of that, it's twofold, right? The first one, not needing to toot our own horns at all, is that this is a business, especially when we're seller focused, but even if we were buyer focused, we're in a more balanced market now. We need to work more hours per sale, period. Right? Like, yes, we spent more time than most when the market was flying, and we didn't just assume that throwing a house on realtor.ca was going to get top dollar. Certainly you can make the assumption that you put a listing up a year or 2 years ago and it would sell. But that wasn't the best thing you could do for your sellers. You had to still put a lot of time and effort in to get them the highest and best dollar, which is something that we've proven over the years that we get results. I came up with that tagline 3 years ago and people seem to like it. But now we have to work a lot more hours per sale. So if you're going to do a similar amount of sales or even a little bit less sales, and it's okay to admit that our numbers probably this year are going to be less than they were, and they'll probably be lower in 2023 than at the peak. And that's okay because we're in a downturn market. Why that might not be the case, though, is a second piece, which is this is now in my career, my second downturn. It's my mom's third. And what we have found over the years, we've already had, I would say, pushing a dozen calls in the last few months since the market has softened from sellers that were previously working with somebody else and now come to us wanting for us to get them results. And that's one example of a broader thing that tends to happen in downturn markets, is you're less likely to use that friend of a friend or that distant family member or that, call them that, anybody to sell a house when it's a much more challenging market. You tend to go and you ask for a recommendation, or you go to that person that is marketing consistently in your neighborhood that you know has the connections to get the job done, has the wherewithal to get the job done, and that ultimately has done it for many other people, right? So what we find is that I don't feel good about it. I'm not that shark of an agent who is so concerned with putting, like, I don't have that fight, I would say, where I like that we get busy when other people struggle more, but I'm certainly conscious of the fact that we're in a position in our careers where that is a cadence that tends to happen. And that is another reason for those agents that are newer to consider working with a bigger team if they can find one that fits and jives with their personality. Because what we'll get to later is, I think, being true to you is the most important thing you can do. It is, as an agent, we all as people have different strengths, different weaknesses, different things that we can bring to the table. And the truer you can be to yourself, the more natural it's going to be and feel, which is going to allow you to be more successful. I think that's very important. But to find a team that you jive with, or to find an individual that you jive with and create a team, I think that bringing that collaboration together can help newer agents position themselves better in a marketplace that is very top heavy. And instead of being upset about that, realize that that is a trend that exists and do your best to be at the top one way or another, because that's certainly somewhere you'd want to be in a market like ours.
So you mentioned about like being true to yourself and kind of letting your personality shine forward. And the reality is it's 100% true, because everything can be duplicated about you except for yourself and your personality, really, right? Like if you have systems and process, whatever it is, everything can be done and delegated out except for you as your personality. Practically speaking, though, let's say if you're an agent who's struggling and it's like, okay, go and be yourself. Like, how do you kind of reconcile that without it feeling, or at least sounding like banal, like go get him, sister advice? Like, practically speaking and tangibly speaking, how does that actually make a difference in your business if you're just being yourself?
Well, it does, because again, it's you. If you're true to yourself, you are going to feel more genuine. You're going to be more confident in what you're doing, and you're going to be a much easier person to trust. And I think we're in a business where 99% of your clients are going to trust you 110%. If they don't, they're not your client, right? So it's like, sure, once in a while, you'll have that person who's like, well, I need to use you, but I don't trust anybody, right? But the reality is the vast majority of clients are only using you because they trust, respect you, and understand what you bring to the table. Because if they didn't, there's way too many of us out there, and they'll find somebody else, right? So it's like that is a very important piece. But when you're in your element, you're much more likely to be trusted than when you're not. So it's like one of the questions that I'm often asked is, what are you supposed to do during the day if the phone's not ringing, or if you're not sure how to generate business online? I've tried that many times and not been very successful with it. But the reality is that we've always done the other stuff, the stuff that people think has disappeared, but it really hasn't. And sure, there are ways to do it online too, for someone maybe a little bit more online conscious than even I am. But it's the reality is that you have to be putting yourself in a position where you are doing something you like in your community, in a neighboring community, where you're bringing some value. People see that you're bringing that value, and it very often will bring business back to you. And you're not, what I don't like is when people are volunteering for something and they're constantly pushing themselves on somebody, their business, right? Like, and there's lots of my colleagues that do things like that. The first thing, the second thing, the 10th thing, and most things in between that they say to somebody is, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm a real estate agent. I take an opposite approach. I go and I volunteer for causes that I believe in. And I guess for me, I'm lucky because I have signs all over the community anyways, but I never say anything about what I do to anybody unless they come to me, which happens more often even than I'd like, but they come to me asking me questions about real estate. How's the market? What did my neighbor's house sell for? Hey, can I talk to you about business? Well, no, not right now. That's not what we're here for. Let's talk about it later. But I don't bring it up. And that in itself is a much more trustworthy thing. So it's funny. It's like you can go and volunteer for a cause you believe in, and you can truly enjoy what you're doing. And you find that you really get along with 60, 70, 80% of the people in that committee that you're volunteering with. They like you too. And then when they have a house to sell, or you're top of mind because you're with them every week and their friend or their relative has a house to sell, and they're going to recommend you or they're going to use you. And all you were doing was being yourself and giving your time to something that you believed in. That's it.
So that makes sense in theory. And I think that you're in a fortunate position where you've been doing this enough time. You have a lot of brand recognition. I don't really believe in luck in business, so I wouldn't ever be as brazen as to say that, because I don't believe that's true at all. But you've just been doing it for long enough, and your face is in enough places that kind of people just know what you do. Let's say if you're a new agent that's trying to get out there, if you're not telling people what it is that you do, how are they going to know?
No. So look, I mean, I skipped a step, right? I will ultimately, was I lucky? Was I fortunate in my circumstances? Yes. But I also was bold enough to say, hey, you know what, Mom, I can make this business better. Let's jump at this. What do you think? And she said, sure, let's try. And honestly, both of us weren't sure it was going to last or weren't sure it was going to work, if I'm being completely honest. But the second it started, there wasn't any thought that I was ever going to do anything else, right? Like, it didn't take long. It was supposed to be a 1-year plan. It's 13 years later and I'm not going anywhere. Right. So it was for those that, again, I mean, that's part of, if you can't take the family shortcut, and I suspect most people listening probably couldn't, that's why I was again harping on whether it's a team, whether it's teaming up with somebody else that's new so that you can pull resources, pull ideas. I think that bigger is often better. It's funny that I say that because we haven't wanted to grow past the two of us. We call ourselves the dynamic duo, and that's not likely to change because that's really how we market ourselves differently from a lot of our competition. But there are a lot of teams. I've got a lot of friends in the business, many that have started way after I did. And my advice to them was always, do not try to do it by yourself at the beginning. It's way too hard, right? It's the amount of resources that you need, the amount of time that you need. I think being around people and being able to bounce ideas off of them is super helpful, as opposed to just trying to come at everything on your own. So there is power in numbers to a degree. Whether that number is 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 50, you have to pick your comfort zone. But that's how more people would know what you're doing. And you can be subtle about it. You can put it in something I've always said from the very beginning. I was all for an email signature that said what I was doing, even if, and I don't do it anymore, but when I was volunteering, they would at least, oh, sorry, I left my real estate signature on the email, but then at least they knew. I didn't have to like push it in people's faces. And look, when someone likes you, they're likely going to start a conversation with you and ask you what you do for a living, right? Like, even or simpler than that. It's not an accident, because I said I'll never bring it up, but I'm going to ask that new person what their name is, what their family situation is, and what they do for a living. And when we're done their half of the conversation, they tend to ask me what I do.
Right.
Or they might say, oh, you sell real estate, right? They already knew who I was. That happens quite often. But that part wasn't that important, because if it was just, oh, hey, here's a genuine conversation. What do you do for a living? There's your platform.
Right.
Give your 30-second elevator speech. That's when you can do it.
Right. So it's almost like there's a time and a place for it. And I think that one of the things is generally speaking, like your gut will tell you when it's a normal time to say something and when it's not a normal time to say something. So if you're in a conversation, right? So like I get a lot of sales scripts, for example, that I see, and it's all like, hey, so how long have you been struggling? How long have you been trying to accomplish your branding goals? Like, that's a really stupid thing to ask somebody, because nobody says that. Like, what kind of a comment?
No, and look, I mean, you and I operate a little bit differently. Sometimes it's what your business is, right? But it's like, I have never been a huge believer in systemizing too many things. And we've had this conversation before.
Yeah.
Because my fear is, if you do it too much, you lose that personality. And the second you do that, there's this disconnect, because a human's dealing with a human. And then it seems like, whether there is a computer involved or not, if you memorize something in your head, you're going to sound like a robot. So it's like, you've got to be careful not to sound like you've scripted something. Because if you're in a volunteer setting, or you're out at a coffee shop, or you're at a sporting event, and you sound like you've scripted something, you're done.
Yeah, conversation over.
Right?
Well, it happens to be, I'm more into frameworks and templates, to be honest, than scripts. So like this, for example, I would be totally into the quote unquote strategy. And I know you don't like giving official terms or whatever, because you're
no, that's fine. Because I'm not saying I don't have strategies.
No,
either.
I understand.
Like,
no, so but
like all of this doesn't happen by accident. But
right.
part of my strategy is be yourself and don't talk too much about business, and don't talk about business in front of other people. So if it's 10 people in a room and I'm not in a corner with somebody else and they ask me a question, I can only answer very generally, because that's not a private conversation at all. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, you set certain ground rules for yourself and for your business. And then you just remember that it's like, oh, so-and-so is really into talking about this. Shoot them a line, whether it's a text or an email. You likely have their contact in some capacity after the meeting is over, or the next day, and say, hey, we never really got to finish our conversation last night. I'd love to chat with you. Tell me when you're free.
Right.
Something like that. If you want to build a relationship, that's a pretty good place to start.
Right. But even a framework that you had of like starting a conversation and just having a genuine conversation and saying, so what do you do? Like, that some people will call it a script. I would call it a framework, whatever it is. But I like that kind of, like, the question that I'm sure some of these listeners right now are asking is like, well, we obviously have to let them know what we do. It's like, well, yes, you do. But don't ask your real estate equivalent of, how long have you been struggling with your branding needs? Or how long have you been trying to figure out your branding? Like, don't ask that question, because nobody talks like that except for a robot or a script. Instead, say, nice to meet you. What's your name? What do you do? Where do you live? Like, that kind of stuff. And I was like, how about you? What's your story? What do you do? Well, you're a local real estate agent. And then you could just talk about whatever you want to talk about, and that kind of way of organically doing it. And which brings us to the next part of, like, it's just about getting out there, getting in front of more people, having more genuine conversations, being less salesy, more authentic. But here's the question. A lot of people are in real estate, let's say, that are struggling, are working really hard, are, let's say, trying to get in front of people. And I guess working hard, obviously, and this is something that you really speak out very, very, I guess, openly about, right? You just got to go in and put in the hours and do the work. I do believe that there's a good number of agents that are working hard, but they're not seeing the same levels of success that you guys are seeing. So what do you think is the difference about possibly the way that you guys are working hard versus the way that some other agents are working hard, that they're not seeing success, but you guys are? Well, so
I've always used the term working smarter, not harder, is very important, right? And something that really irks me, and it doesn't happen as often anymore because I'm pretty vocal in trying to help my fellow agents about this, but I'm sitting in a brokerage and there's an agent who's new and they are showing up to the office every day, roughly between the hours of 9 to 5, and they're sitting on their computer. There's not a damn thing, in my opinion, that they can be doing on their computer that's more valuable than getting out there in the community. So unless they have no commitments whatsoever on a personal side, on a family side, and they're then every night out there trying to meet people at bars or events or whatever, that's not how they should be spending every single one of their days. I think being immersed in an area with agents, whether it's a brokerage or somewhere else, whether it's a physical area or an area online, is important, like I said before, to bounce ideas off of each other. But that's not the only thing that a new agent should be doing. I think getting out there is very important. I think that if you are not the type of person to be out there socially, you really need a team to help feed you business, because that is the main driver of business, is social interaction in real estate. I think anyone who says otherwise is likely not being truthful. So getting out there and being yourself and having people gravitate to you. So it's important to be yourself in the right setting, right? Because if you're out of place where you're trying to put yourself, whether that's a coffee shop, whether that's a kid's sports event, whether that's a community event or volunteering in any capacity, if you're not natural in that setting, you're likely not going to be very noticeable or noticed or have any business opportunity from it.
Or you'll be noticeably and transparently out of place.
Correct, which I would say is like they're either that or you're out of place or you're invisible. Both would have the same effect, right? So you've got to put yourself in places where you feel like you are naturally. And what's nice about that is it could very quickly spin from sitting in the office and getting really tired of it feeling like a 9-to-5 cubicle job and waiting for the phone to ring and getting frustrated because you don't know when you're going to get a listing or when a seller's going to call you or a buyer's going to call you or email you, and you really are struggling to do work, versus, oh, hey, I'm being told that I should go play basketball in the middle of the day if that's something that I like doing, or I should go to I should go and get involved in my community. Yeah, I'm saying that being in a committee in the middle of the day on a Tuesday or playing a basketball game on a Sunday night is probably a better use of your time than looking at stats and knowing the second that a house sells and what it's sold for. You have to know that stuff. And as you get more experience, you will learn it and you will take it in much faster. And that element of the business is very important because the knowledge component is very important, but that can be done at any time. You also have to find time for getting your face in front of people, because if you're an encyclopedia that's dusty on a shelf, I don't care how much information you have if you can't use that information.
Even if it's like, I feel like even if, for example, let's say somebody was like, no, but from 9 to 5 every single day, the work that I'm doing for real estate is absolutely essential. And let's even say hypothetically it works. Well, I agree with you. I can't envision a world that sitting on a computer for 9 hours a day is actually helping your business. But let's say you need to sit in front of a computer for 2 hours a day, I don't know, to research leads that you're going to call later, whatever that may be. Go to a coffee shop every day, the same day of a week. Go to 5 different coffee shops, Monday to Fridays, the same 2 hours a day, and just work there. And then,
but again, that's natural for you. I almost brought that up before because you feel comfortable in a coffee shop. Somebody else might not feel comfortable in the coffee shop. They might need to do it somewhere else. I have colleagues that will pick up 20 deals a year getting drunk at a bar because they're in their element when they're drunk at a bar, and they're likable, approachable people. And all they got to do was drink and enjoy themselves. but they know what they're doing. So even if they're sloshed, they can still have a coherent enough conversation about their business, about real estate, and it works for them.
Yeah.
Right? So whether it's a coffee shop and it's hard for me to give examples because I just give the examples that work for me.
Right.
Right? Like I like volunteering. I like playing sports. There's things that I like doing. I do those things. My mom doesn't like sports, but her kids love sports. If it wasn't for my brother and I being as involved in the sporting community when we moved here, she got a real estate license in Toronto. She did the courses in Toronto. We moved here. She was brand new, knew 3 families in Hamilton. That was it. Right. And her first year was a top 100 agent in the city. How did that happen? Because she will admit it, she was at the soccer field, she was at the soccer field, and this is another thing we haven't talked about yet, but that the number one conversation that people have virtually anywhere in public with somebody else is about real estate. So what my mom was not afraid to do, and you got to be very careful how you do this, and it's not something I do, but 2 people are having a conversation at a table next to you in a restaurant or at a coffee shop about real estate, and they're 2 friends and they're having a conversation, or they're a husband and wife or partnership, whatever, she'll chime right into that conversation.
Yeah.
And if you do that wrong, and even if you do it right, sometimes people are going to take that the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like knowing that those conversations are out there. I sidetracked a little bit, but she started her business, and a lot of her business was because people were having those conversations at the sporting events. She was half watching my brother and I, and she was half listening for conversations and made sure that she knew. This was pre-internet, right? It sounds crazy to say that, but she knew all the dailies. She knew all of the houses. When we were in Dundas, she knew all of the houses that were for sale in Dundas, and she knew the last 10 sales stats. And when we were in Flamborough, she knew all of that. And what did she do? She had that information. She was listening for what people were saying. Oh, my friend would love to be in Dundas. Okay, well, guess what? First house she ever sold was on Suter Drive in Dundas. She's having a conversation. Somebody else is having a conversation about how their friend loves Dundas and they'd love to be able to buy a 4-bedroom house in Dundas. And my mom made that happen. And that was her first deal. Right? So it's like all because she was at a soccer game.
We live in the same community, obviously, and I'm kind of telling that to the people who are listening to this who don't know that we were friends before we kind of were, I don't want to call us colleagues, but whatever it is, professional network acquaintances, whatever you want to call it. And one of the things I know is like, for example, when we have like carnivals at my kids' schools, your mom is literally in there with a cotton candy machine making cotton candy for the kids at these carnivals, right? Me and your brother actually created a basketball league a few years back, and obviously you were there joining the league. You brought your friends in. Like, these are the kinds of things also that you're talking about. It's like, find your place. And this is like when we build real estate brands for our clients, we don't just, like, most of the time when people think about a brand, they're thinking about visual identity, website, logo, and like basically that's it.
That's not your brand.
That's not your brand.
That's not your brand. That's your color scheme.
Exactly.
It drives me crazy when people say that your brand is you. It's your personality. It's who you are. It's what you do. It's how you interact with people.
Exactly.
That's much more important than your logo.
Yeah. So the second part of it, that's for us, that's just the first part. That's the tiny part. And I say, like, that's where everybody thinks it stops. The second part of it is figuring out what makes you different, who you are, right? Figuring out the kind of people that you want to be with, that you want to talk to, and figuring out where you can go, where you can add value and that kind of stuff. And it's a very, almost as you mentioned, like pre-internet way of marketing. But really, that's like in 1,000 years and 1,000 years ago, like brand was always basically the same idea. We just have different mediums to kind of promote a quote unquote brand, but it's the same idea. Brand is
sure. I'm not talking about it because I hate social media, but there are people that need to look and be social media ready all the time. And you know the type, and you know what I'm talking about. Yep. And they can build a brand for themselves on their phone. And that's fine because it works for some people and it's natural for them. If we were in a world where the only way to get clients was on social media, I would have a big problem. But that's not the world we live in because that's not how I generate business. And I also, for a year or so, I was afraid that I was going to be a dinosaur. until I realized, you know what? That's fine. And I can let Instagram go, and it's a big fad, and maybe it'll pass and maybe it won't, but that's okay. And do I still use it? Of course I do. You have to market your clients' properties effectively. But am I actively using it to generate business? No, I'm not.
So let me ask you this then. Let's say you had to start again in a new market, nobody knew you, and you didn't have any money for marketing. What would you do, and how long do you think it will be before you're back into the same position that you're at right now?
Well, do I have the cheat code of being who I am right now and my credentials, or I'm a new person? Because they're two very different questions.
You know what you do, but you can't promote yourself as having over 1,000 transactions.
So I'm just new.
Yeah, the same knowledge though, but that's it.
Well, I would go and have as many conversations with top agents as I needed to align myself with them to work under them. If I had the ability to prove myself to them, I know I'd be able to do it, whether I could talk about my credentials or not. It would certainly speed up the conversation. But if I could just say, look, give me a chance. Let's have a conversation here. Throw a script at me. Let's get this house listed. Let's do it. And I would do my first sale or two for free if I needed to prove myself. If it was in a community that I wanted to work in.
What would getting under the wing of these agents, like, except for like surrounding, because obviously you're the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with the most, what would getting under the wings of these top agents actually tangibly do for you?
That's your exposure, right? So it's not needing to build it from scratch. It's teaming up with that agent who aligns with you, who is already out there. So instead of you're moving to a brand new place and you don't really know how that place operates, right? Like it kind of a similar scenario to what you're talking about, right? Like I'm starting out fresh. If you're planning on living in your childhood neighborhood and you've been there and maybe you've never left, or you went away for university and then you came back, that's different. You're already ingrained in that community. That's a head start too, in my opinion. And then I would just say, get out there, be yourself, and make sure everybody knows what you're doing. But if you were going somewhere brand new and all you had was your knowledge, I would do my best to find somebody that I could work with, work under, work in collaboration with, because it would help me. They already have the system, if they're like-minded, to know where you should be on a Saturday, what's going on a Tuesday. And they have systems in place to help you with that, as opposed to really having to try to figure out where you should be spending your time. And yeah, there's ultimately the bonus of, if they're busy enough, there's spillover business. Because one of the things we didn't talk about yet is, and it's harder now post-COVID, but they're starting to happen again, is one of the best places you can spend time as a young agent is at an open house. So you should be begging, again, take another agent, a more established agent that has listings, out for coffee, out for lunch. Prove yourself to them. If you just send an email and say, I really want to do an open house next Sunday, they're going to ignore it. We're going to ignore it. If you create a network with somebody and you really prove yourself to that agent and say, look, I love the opportunity to do your open houses anytime you have an open house you're not able to do. If you actually proved yourself to them, they're likely going to throw that bone to you. And being able to do open houses is a great way to get in front of dozens of people in 2 hours. And those dozens of people have at least a small amount, even if they're a nosy neighbor, of interest in real estate. So you now have the ability to get in front of numerous people that have an interest that would help you in your career.
So following this strategy then, so you get in front of, just to kind of recap that first part, you get in front of the right people, the top agents, you basically learn anything and everything you can for them, and you offer just value without expecting anything in return, do their open houses for free. Essentially, you said, if need be, literally just take deals for free. And just do.
And I'm not even saying you have to do that. I'm just saying, what would I do to really say, look, I'm so confident in what I have to bring to the table that I'll do this for free to show you that you want me. Right. Like, right. But that's look, I'm a confident person. You know that. And so I can do that. A lot of people wouldn't do that. That's fine. say, look, I'd really love the opportunity, and here's why. Whatever that here's why is, you make your pitch as why they should invest their time and perhaps money and clients' expectations in you. If you can convince them of that, you've done your job. But you got to figure out what you bring to the table, that collective you or any you that I'm talking to right now. You have to be able to do that. That's important.
But basically prioritize their mentorship, their exposure, their I don't know, experience.
All of the above. All of it is important.
So prioritize that kind of stuff above just the money, and then kind of go from those opportunities that are presented by actually leading with.
And it's no different than what I say I do now. That's no, like I prioritize relationships over immediate business. And I find that helps me in the often even short term, but medium term and long term. You're way better off building relationships that way.
So let me ask you this then. Second part of the question is, how long do you think it would take following that to get back to where you're at right now?
2 to 3 years.
Wow. 2 to 3 years of like hard, nonstop grinding, just exposure.
This is not a career for people that think that money is going to flow in immediately. I should be very fair and honest about that. It's not. It can seem easy, and it maybe is easy enough for some, but there's a grind at the beginning. I even say with my shortcut, it was a grind for me. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of time away from my young family, a lot of time away from the basketball games that I love going to or watching. That was not an option. My evenings were not my evenings.
Right.
They were my clients' evenings. Right. So that's one example of it. And then it wasn't like I wasn't working during the day either. Of course I was. That's where you build the knowledge, when you've got those gaps of time in between. Right. But it's, you've got to realize that and I think a lot of people probably wouldn't want the job of a top agent either. So to say, if I wasn't living in the community that I want to live in and working with my mom, would I want to be as busy as I am right now? Probably not. So maybe a harder question for me than for some, where it's like, I'd be okay with being half as busy as I am right now. I'd be totally fine with that. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like, maybe that if I ever in this alternate universe wasn't here, I'd be aiming for something like that. And then it would probably happen a little bit quicker. But a year to 2 years, the average agent takes 6 months before they sell their first house. And I know everybody thinks they're above average, but 100 new agents show up. 50 of us are right around average. And you got like 10 or 15 that are above average, and everybody else is below, right? So it's like well below.
6 months actually sounds a bit quick. I'm if that's the stat, I'm surprised it's that fast.
For your first sale, not when it closes, but when you make a transaction. And that's on average, right? So now we're, I guess, 8 or 9 months from any money coming in.
Right.
So that's and that's from date of getting your license. So what I guess should be very clear about too is if you're just starting with the educational journey, it's a long process, and you better be doing something else in the meantime. And what's really hard with real estate is I know a lot of people who think that they can just do it as a part-time thing. And that's a really bad idea too.
Yeah.
Because the problem is your sphere of influence, which is still where a lot of your business will ever come from. Yeah. Know that you're a part-time agent and that you're doing something else. And are they really going to trust what is 99% of people's most valuable asset in somebody who's just half-assing it and doing it part-time? I know I wouldn't.
Right. So let me ask you this. Why do you think success is something that's so elusive to so many agents?
Because there's too many of us. It's not a nice answer, but when I heard, I think it was fairly early in COVID that a stat came out. I've never verified it. It irked me, but I didn't feel the need to go and check that there are more real estate agents in Ontario than teachers.
That probably sounds about right, to be honest.
That's scary. That's not necessary.
Right.
Do we do an important job? Absolutely. Do educators do a very important job? They sure do.
Right.
And there are consistently more people that need to be educated than there are people that need to sell a house. So why should we have more agents?
I think the challenge is, and I may be wrong about this, but well, I'll tell you what I'm not wrong about is generally speaking, the barrier of entry is so low. The therefore I may be wrong about, but I don't think I am, is that typically speaking, if you wanted to really simplify it to like a dichotomy, there's two types of people that become agents. There's the kinds of people that are good business people, whether they know it at that point in time. They're good business people. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be successful. And so they start their own business as being a real estate agent or a real estate business owner, as I prefer to call them. Then there's a second group of people that either their friends said, you should totally be a real estate agent. You'll be awesome. You're so friendly. Or they watch all of these like shows like Selling Sunset or whatever it is. They think that's what it is. Basically, they don't really have any other thing going on professionally speaking. And it's like, what do I do right now? I guess I'll just become an agent. So that low barrier of entry means that, let's say, these 10% of people that are actually going to be successful because if they're not going to do it in this industry, they'll do it in another industry. And then there's, let's say, 90% of people that are basically in for a rude awakening. And obviously, like, that's why 87% of people, agents, and I actually thought it was 92%, but it's either way, it's between 87 and 92% of agents that will fail in the first 5 years of business. Why? Because 90% of agents basically became an agent because their friend said, you should do this because you're really friendly, or, oh my God, Selling Sunset looks awesome. I could totally do that. And meanwhile, they forget they live in a place like Hamilton where we don't have houses like they do in Selling Sunset. So like, there's a discrepancy there, and they didn't see it coming before they actually signed up for it. And that's where that saturation comes in. So let me ask you a different question. Same question, kind of worded a bit differently. What do you think is the biggest indicator of success in an agent?
I don't know, like business acumen, understanding of people. I think that, like I said before, relationship building is very important. I don't think there's any one thing other than perhaps, I mean, I like to say the word consistency is super important. And what is something that my mom and I pride ourselves in is that we do our best to treat our clients with their $4 million house the same way as we treat our clients with a $300,000 condo, right? So it's like, be consistent in what you do in every facet of your business and your life. And that tends to breed success. I can't promise that for anybody, right? Because if you're consistently doing things the wrong way, then being consistent is not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
So it's like, is there a secret sauce other than being yourself? No, but like you got to be yourself if you're a person that people gravitate to and like also, right? Like it is a relationship business. And I think that the very honest thing that people can do in assessing whether real estate could potentially work for them, not even that it will, but that it could potentially work, is do they gravitate to people or not? If you don't, whether that's on social media or that's in person, if you're not a magnet to people and people aren't a magnet to you, that might be a problem.
Mm-hmm. So I like the consistency answer as well, because I do believe that there is some space, and maybe a little bit more difficult for them, but I believe that there is room in the market for people that aren't naturally, let's say, the center of attention, or people aren't naturally attracted to, or they're a magnet, as you said. It's definitely a lot harder. But I think that the great equalizer personally is that hard work is something that is within anyone's reach. So regardless of anyone's upbringing, like some people may have gone through more challenges in their life to make it that hard work just as more of a natural consequence to them. Like, fine, be that as it may. At the end of the day, we're not all as smart as each other. We're not all as creative as each other. We're not all the same. But one thing that we all could be the same is we all have the ability to push a little bit harder when it doesn't really feel like we can. And for me, the reason I like that word consistency is that everybody can be consistent in whatever they decide is the right thing for them, as long as they're focused on the right thing to be consistent with, and then they just be consistent. Anybody can make it. And I don't believe it's complicated. I think it's very difficult, but I don't believe it's complicated at all to be successful in this game.
It's not complicated, but it's very difficult.
Right. So before I let you go, then, what's one final piece of advice that you'd like to leave us with?
I mean, I feel like I've said it already, but get out there and be yourself, right? Like enjoy life and enjoy real estate or whatever career you choose. Because I think perhaps that one other piece of secret sauce that I didn't get to before is you have to enjoy what you're doing, or people will pick up on that and they will not enjoy you as much, right? Like I think that's true if anyone's listening to this that has no interest in being a real estate agent. If you enjoy your job, you will be better at your job, period. And you'll be a happier person. So it's like this nice, it all kind of works together, but it starts with enjoyment, and that's a big part.
Awesome. Okay, so Jordan, how can people find you if they want to look you up, ask you questions, kind of talk about the interview? How can people find you?
Look up Sarit and Jordan Zalter on Instagram. If you Google us, you'll find probably 5 or 6 different websites that have our contact information on it. Literally, just we're blessed to have a very easy to say and understand, but very rarely used last name. So if you type in Zalter anywhere on any type of search engine, you will find us.